Revolution Radio. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Welcome back to Dave Mackey's Shiny Side Out on Freedom Slips Revolution Radio. You love it. You know you love it. And today, we're going to keep on talking about missing scientists. Lost science and missing scientists. Lost scientists if you want, but I think they're missing rather than lost. So that's just where I'm with my head. If you can donate, this is an important message for the station. If you can donate, please do so, because this is listener-funded radio. If you cannot donate, that's okay. I dig it, man. It's hard times, right? Just tell your friends and family, strangers, about the station so they can donate instead. If some people like something, I am sure somebody is going to like something. Because, it's something for everybody. I mean, there really is. It doesn't matter what your thing is on the spectrum. You will find someone on Revolution Radio that spins your dial. I guarantee it. But yeah, so we are going to talk about the scientists, or the scientist rather, that discovered anti-gravity and then disappeared completely. Now, let's put a disclaimer on this a little bit. She didn't disappear completely per se. She just disappeared from public view because she started working for the government. Okay, and so I think there's some stuff here. We have an interview. I guess an interview with her son, which we will share with you as well. But ultimately, this is a person that sort of disappeared from the view. So that is obviously not a good thing. Here we go. So we talked about Jacob Grinberg. We talked about, obviously, Nikola Tesla, all scientists that, in my opinion, Jacob Grinberg, he did disappear, right? He did disappear. Tesla, in my opinion, was probably killed by I think it's the German operative. We spoke about him, Skolzny, I think his name was. But I'll get to that in a second. So that definitely happened. He died, and then a lot of his stuff, Tesla did this, it disappeared. He was meant to have 80 crates of documents. 80 crates, that's what they counted. And what was finally delivered to his heirs, as it were 60 crates. Yeah. 60 crates, not 80. So could you argue, well, they're probably repacked and just more efficient? Maybe. But on the other hand, you could also argue that, well, maybe their 20 crates were missing. And when I say missing, they were taken away from public view so that we can no longer understand what Tesla truly had or did. Okay, so that's important to understand. It's a thing. It is a thing. And like I said, there's some indications that he might have been assassinated. Nikola Tesla did this. And then we come to Ning Li. Did we give the background on Ning Li? I think we did we?
Yes.
Cool. And then, the scientist that discovered anti-gravity and then disappeared completely. So this is an article, but then it's going to be followed by another article which has more in-depth research on her. So Dave, do you want to get us started on Dr. Ning Li?
Yes, February 23rd this was, and this article is by Asaya McCall. Dr. Ning Li, it says image designed in Canva, but I'll keep moving.
I've taken the image out.
I know. The author has the copyright and assumes the responsibility for provenance. In the summer of 1999, Discover magazine caused a stir in scientific circles with this explosive article on physicist Dr. Ning Li and her revolutionary research into anti-gravity technology. Months later, she vanished without a trace. That's consistent with our experience of people who discover things. By October 2000, she had vanished into the vast depths of military-industrial obscurity, leaving a trail of tantalizing clues about her breakthrough. It is the closest science has ever come to discovering an anti-gravity device. And it's a quote here, it's long. It says, "The device did not modify gravity. Rather, it produces a gravity-like field that may be either attractive or repulsive," says Jonathan Campbell, a scientist at the NASA Marshall Space Flight Center, we'll fix that in post, who has worked with Li. The quote continues, "It's a gravity-like force you can point in any direction. It could be used in space to protect the International Space Station against impacts by small meteoroids and orbital debris." Rumours flew about the mysterious scientist and her invention, but the truth remains shrouded in secrecy. What happened to Dr. Ning Li? Mackie.
From the smallest molecular particles to entire planets, gravity is a force that binds us all. It is an attractive power so subtle yet strong to keep celestial bodies in orbit and our feet firmly planted on terra firma. According to physicists, it may be one of nature's gentlest forces, but it touches every corner of our existence, from refrigerator magnets and light bulbs to the heavenly bodies of our vast universe. Dr. Ning Li wanted to take us one step further and revolutionize how we use gravity, so she left the University of Alabama in 1999 and founded the company AC Gravity, LCC. We're going to hear about that a bit more later. What she found was incredible. A high-temperature superconducting disk that creates a force field that would effectively neutralize gravity. In non-nerdy Star Trek speak, an anti-gravity device. It was far from hoverboards and flying cars, but the invention was real. Okay? The next article is from July 30th, 2023. So it's only like a month old. And it was written by Noah Logan, okay, who actually lives in Huntsville, which is where Dr. Ning Li also lives and worked. And it was written for the Huntsville Business Journal. The Huntsville Business Journal. I'll just pop that in there for you guys into the chat. Where's my chat?
Oh,
find it. Here we go. Look at me finding it. But ultimately, perfect. Paste. That'd be good. Now it did it. All right. So let's just start off and then
there it is.
Here we go. Anti-gravity. Blah blah blah. Okay. Dr. Ning Li's son talks about his mom's career and legacy, along with the internet's obsession with her disappearance. Well, again, from public view. I want to be very clear on this one, okay? Now, this is written in first person, so this is written by Noah Logan. As the phone started to ring and I waited for George Guangyu Men to answer, I was still trying to think of what I would say and how the interview would go. It is not uncommon in my line of work to call up a stranger and start asking questions. But how do you transition from introducing yourself to someone to asking him if you can write a story about the disappearance of his mother? Everything about this story was proving to be uncommon. I first learned about Dr. Ning Li from a YouTube video that I watched shortly before summer, titled "The Scientist That Discovered Anti-Gravity and Disappeared Completely." Garnered more than 3 million views and was based on a Huntsville scientist. And, this guy is from Huntsville. Over the course of the next 22 minutes, I listened intently as the video's creator, who goes by the name Barely Sociable, told a story which seemed appropriate for a mystery novel. Not only was Dr. Ning Li from Huntsville, she was also a trailblazer in her field of anti-gravity research. After migrating to America from China in 1983, Li began working at the University of Alabama, Huntsville's UAH, Center for Space Plasma and aeronomic research. She became famous and somewhat controversial for a series of papers she co-authored from 1991 to 1993. In her work, Lee described a practical method of producing an anti-gravity field which had never been done before. It's always been held that because gravity is a basic force of nature, constructing an anti-gravity machine is theoretically impossible. However, Lee and her co-author Douglas Torr theorized ways around this belief using a high-temperature superconductor, HTSD. In an HTSD, the tiny gravitational effect of each individual atom is multiplied by the billions of atoms in a disk. Using about 1 kilowatt of electricity, Lee claimed, her device could produce a force field that would effectively neutralize the gravity above 1 foot in diameter region extending from the surface of the planet to outer space. Let me say this again. 1 kilowatt of electricity, and she claims her device could produce a force field that would effectively neutralize gravity above 1 foot in diameter region extending from the surface of the planet
Wow.
to outer space. Okay, that was quite something, right? To demonstrate their research, they invited officials from the renowned science and technology magazine Popular Mechanics to visit the laboratory in Huntsville to see their work in progress. A 12-inch disc, which acted as a high-temperature superconductor, HTSD. Upon the disc's completion, they told the magazine a bowling ball placed anywhere above this disc will stay exactly where you left it. Exactly where you left it. In the late 90s, she claimed to have created anti-gravity devices that were fully functional, and this was big news in both scientific journals and mainstream press. In 1997, Dr. Lee continued to expand on her concept and conduct more experiments. She published papers describing the anomalous weight changes in objects suspected over a rotating superconductor. And again, rotating, I think we're talking about toroidal forces here. Anyway, to say her work referred to as taming gravity could change the world is an understatement. Taming gravity would drastically change the way we transport on every level.
Mm-hmm.
Or transportate here in the text. Humans could travel the world at ease, and we could finally get our hands on those sweet hoverboards from Back to the Future. It would also transform how we power transportation and effectively end our reliance on fossil fuels. So what became of Dr. Ning Lee? The story gets even stranger, Dave.
It sure does. In 1999, Lee left UAH to start her own company, AC Gravity, and commercialize a device based on her theories. Her colleagues obviously believed in her work, as the chair of UAH's physics department, Larry Smalley, also departed the university to join her. Public records show that in 2001, the US Department of Defense gave AC Gravity a grant for $448,970 to research the technology. However, these results were never published.
What a shock.
Yeah, I know, right? In fact, Dr. Lee never published anything again. And even though the business license for AC Gravity was updated yearly through 2018, there is no record of any further work done by the company. Lee's career after 2002 is the subject of a great mystery. Barely Sociable's research turned up a document showing that she gave a presentation at the 2003 MITRE conference titled Measurability of AC Gravity Fields. The MITRE Corporation manages federally funded research for several US agencies. At the conference, she presented along with a Redstone Arsenal official from US Army Aviation and Missile Command. Means a lot there. Meaning that her research was still being conducted up to that point. Oh, we have an ad in the middle of it. That's great. The trail on Lee ends after her last documented correspondence in May 2003, when she sent a private email to colleagues claiming to have conducted an experiment in which she observes an 11 kilowatt of output effect. The significance of that amount is still a mystery as well. Her absence did not go unnoticed. In 2004, journalist Tim Ventura sent an email to another scientist in the field named Eugene Podkletnov with the subject line tracking down Dr. Ning Li. In the email, Ventura writes, "Every 2 months I retry the lining@comcast.net email address that you gave me for Dr. Ning Li. I can tell from return receipts that somebody is reading her email, but I never get a reply." Podkletnov responded confirming her well-being and that she was still working with the DoD but unable to talk about her work. He also told Ventura that he was unable to get a working email address or phone number for her. As the years passed, the conversation regarding Li's whereabouts started to amplify, along with the conspiracies around it. In July of 2008, a scientist named Jack Safati provided a rather alarming update during an interview that was later posted on YouTube and included in the video from Barely Sociable. During the interview, Safati claims that Li was no longer working for the Department of Defense and had moved back to China to continue her work. The transcript of the interview conveys the seriousness of this accusation. Meki.
This is very important from a national security and political point of view. One of the key scientists is this Chinese woman named Ning Li. She has disappeared and gone back to China, said Sarfati. She was working at NASA and the Redstone Arsenal, but she has disappeared for several years now. The people at the Pentagon cannot reach her anymore. She's allegedly back in China, and the Chinese are pouring money into similar experiments now. That's why our intelligence guys are very interested. The most likely people to develop the first anti-gravity propulsion technology are now the Chinese. The video about Ning Li ends shortly after Sarfati's interview with no clear answer as to her career after 2002. And again, this is written in first person by the author. I immediately replayed the video and started to figure out how to continue the story. Various articles have been published online in the 2 years since the YouTube video, with only one update. An obituary was published on the Berry Hill Funeral Home website. Dr. Ning Li passed away on July 27, 2021. So 3 years ago, almost exactly. However, her obituary revealed nothing else regarding her disappearance. She was 79 years old, one of the world's leading scientists in superconductivity anti-gravity research. Dr. Li constructed the first 12-inch HTSD of the world in the late 90s. The obituary reads, "Since Berry Hill Funeral Home is located in Huntsville, it's safe to assume the accusations of Li leaving for China or even being kidnapped were wrong. However, many readers cast the doubts on the credibility of the obituary and continue to support various conspiracy theories instead. The obituary contained the name of her son, George Guangyu Men, along with his children. After an embarrassing amount of research, I found that George has registered an LLC within the city and the phone number associated with his business. It took a bit of work. It took a bit to work up the courage, but I was way too far down the rabbit hole to give up at this point. I understand that. I gave George a call, and after getting to know each other a bit, he was gracious enough to invite me into his home and talk about his mother. George informed me that while no one has called his phone before, I wasn't the first person to contact him on the topic. He has received various letters from people in New Zealand, amongst other places, hoping to learn more about Dr. Li's research. He can't help but laugh when he recalls the one time he asked his mom about her work. This is important, everybody. I asked her once, he recalled. I said, "Mom, do you need to tell me something?" She told me, "First off, you don't know anything. Second off, even if you think you might know something, you forget about it." I said, "Okay, that's fine." So she clearly was not encouraging him to know anything about her work at all.
That's right.
George was vaguely aware that people were still interested in his mom, but he didn't understand just how interested people were. Remember, he's not a scientist. I played Barely Sociable's video for him and his two children in his living room, along with showing him some of the online discourse, and he was able to clarify some things people have speculated on over the years. Most importantly, Dr. Lee never left the DoD and never left the country to work for the Chinese government. There's one nugget of information that lines up with Sarfati's 2008 interview. George said that his mother was visited by Chinese officials on one occasion in 2008, when members of the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, were visiting America. They did attempt to recruit her back to the country to continue her work, but Lee had no interest. Lee had migrated along with George in the late 80s and had no desire to leave her position. She did attempt to return for her mother's funeral after she passed away, but George said that she was denied permission. I remember that so clearly, he said. She was very upset. George also explained how he noticed change in his mom after leaving UAH for the private sector. He says all the secrecy that comes with the job began to change her demeanor and behavior over the years. When she was at university, she loved to publish her findings, he recalled. But after she got her top secret clearance, she wasn't allowed to share anything anymore with anyone. She became much quieter. She would return from work looking worn down with her makeup messed up. It wasn't like that when she was at the university. Now, just this is what happens, everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Once you and this is not about, oh, people can't keep secret. People can keep secrets.
Oh yeah.
And you know what? If you don't, there are consequences, and people have had those consequences visited upon them.
They don't like those consequences, and so they do keep their secrecy. Yes.
100%. And if you think, oh, I don't care what they do to me, well, if you have someone you care about, this is always, I guess, the final attack line, if you will. If you have someone you care about, then they will use that person against you, or
totally,
or whatever that thing might be.
Family, it doesn't matter what it is. Yeah.
Now the author goes on here. I have filed requests through the Freedom of Information Act for the results of a 2001 grant, along with any other research from her, but it was denied, along with requests from others. It's safe to assume that we won't be finding out the specifics of her research after 2002 for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Dave.
Yeah, it's immediately apparent when talking to George the admiration he holds for his mother. He says, "My mother was very concentrated. She concentrated on one thing and only one thing at a time." He explained, "She passed that down too. She told us to find our one thing, concentrate on it, with all you have, and don't feel the need to compare yourself to any other people. Just do the best you can with your passion." And I think her grandkids will learn from that. Dr. Lee continued to work at Redstone Arsenal every day until 2014, when Lee was struck by a vehicle while crossing the street on the UAH campus.
Sorry, 1 second. Don't. So she didn't die in her bed in her sleep. I want to be very clear.
Yeah.
Don't.
The accident unfortunately had lasting effect on their family. His father, Lee's husband, suffered a heart attack at the moment he saw his wife of 46 years being thrown from the impact. He would pass away a year later in 2015. For Lee, this accident caused permanent brain damage that resulted in Alzheimer's disease shortly after. Lee lived with George, who took care of his mum for the last 6 years of her life before she passed away in 2021. These years were difficult for George. Watching a loved one suffer from Alzheimer's is always a horrendous thing. Add on to that, he knew intimately how smart she was before the disease ran its course, and how much her intelligence meant to her. For 6 years, people asked how I could do that for 6 years. 6 whole years, George said. I said, first of all, she's my mother. Second of all, she gave us a better life. Without her, I wouldn't have been able to come to the States and get my education. Thirdly, I just really admired her as a person. George found comfort in his religion and his church community from the Chinese Christian Church of Madison during these times. He recalled how he could always tell when his mum was uncomfortable, even when she couldn't talk. When the Buddhism-inspired music he was playing didn't succeed at comforting her, it was a member of his church who suggested playing Christian hymns, and, according to George, he noticed a difference right away. My conversation with George, says the author of this article, along with his entire story, was one to be remembered. I am amazed how such a brilliant and intelligent woman seems largely forgotten in a community that places such an emphasis on brilliance and intelligence. In our first phone call, George asked me questions about what I hoped to accomplish with this story. I had a general idea at the time, but it became more and more apparent over time. What George was able to share might not satisfy the swarms of conspiracy theories and UFO enthusiasts that seek out information about his mum's research. But hopefully, we can bring more awareness, both within our community and online, about just how amazing of a person Dr. Ning Li truly was and the story of her life.
How about them apples?
So look, it could be that she was not. I'm not going to say accidented. I mean, given Alzheimer's treatment, which led to her being hit by a car, and then that was just a continued demise after that. But that's speculation.
Honestly, who knows, right?
That's right.
But we need to understand that this is a real thing that happened here, right? This is not something that we just made up, and it actually gets more interesting. To be honest with you, there's a few more things here, and we're gonna hear a bit more about her, the collaborator Plotnikov, I think his name was. Mm-hmm. This is an article that I got off. I leached off webarchive.org. You know, I think it's
Time Machine.
Part of the Wayback Machine.
Yeah.
And Bose, Einstein, and Anti-Gravity is what it's called. Okay. And I unfortunately don't know where it was published first, suffice it to say. But it's rather interesting what we can glean here. In the 1980s, Ning Li, a world-renowned scientist, predicted that if a time-varying magnetic field were applied to superconductor ions trapped in a lattice structure, the ions would absorb enormous amounts of energy. Now, this is the first time that we're told what she actually did in a bit more detail. Okay. Confined in the lattice, the ions would begin to rapidly spin, causing each to create a minuscule gravitational field. It wouldn't actually be an anti-gravity machine. It would, however, be exerting an attractive or repulsive force on all matter and would therefore be pretty close to an impossible machine. Dr. Ning Li, working in UHS's Center for Space Plasma and Aerodynamic Research, has recently been working at UAH on an artificial gravitational field made inside a container made of superconducting material. If Einstein was right, the amount of gravitomagnetic energy produced by an object is proportional to its mass and its movement, explains Dr. Li. To create the artificial gravitational fields, Torrent Li proposed placing a superconducting container in a magnetic field to align ions that are spinning or rotating in tiny circles inside the superconducting material. Their theory predicts the existence of ionic spin or rotation in a superconductor in a magnetic field. To understand how an HTSD, the high-temperature superconducting disk, is critical to the construction of a force field machine, it's useful to know something about an unusual state of matter called a Bose-Einstein condensate. In our day-to-day lives, we encounter three states of matter: solid, liquid, and gas. In the laboratory, it is possible to create another state of matter in which all the atoms are aligned in a way that makes them behave as if they were one single atom. This unique state of matter is named after Albert Einstein and Indian physicist Satyendra Nath Bose, who predicted its existence decades ago. The Bose-Einstein condensate is essentially when many atoms squeeze into a small space. The first time it was produced, about 2,000 rubidium atoms fitted into a 20-micron space. These experiments were run at a temperature as close to absolute zero that science will allow due to quantum mechanics and thermodynamics. The high-temperature superconducting disk, HTSD, allows for each atom to produce a gravitational effect 6 orders of magnitude higher than usual. 6 orders of magnitude. That's phenomenal. Because of the small mass of an atom, the acceleration must compensate in order to make a strong enough force. Atoms spin very quickly, and in a Bose-Einstein condensate, enough atoms come together to form a force that is perpendicular to the spin of the atom. This produces a gravity-like field which could be controlled in any direction. Sorry, I'm going to stop reading here and hand to Dave, but just bear with me for a second. What they've just described there, potentially, is how UAPs move. Right? If you have a number of these HTSDs, right, in a craft, and you can move them, the disk that is, right, in such a way that they work together, or not as it were, as you know, whatever you want to achieve, you can achieve the maneuvers that we have seen in the UAPs.
Very similar to the fly-by-wire. You have an intent, but they perform the function to get you there.
Correct. So it is really interesting, and again, this also the toroidal forces that are being talked about here, because these ions are spinning. Remember, they're rotating in a magnetic field. It also seems, to me at least, very close to what the Nazi bell produced as an effect. But Dave, why don't you take us in an HTSD?
Yeah, and before I start, I wanted to say something too, and that is, if you've seen the small disc levitating above magnets in a circular path and giving off a vapor as it cools the atmosphere that's flowing down upon it, you can see that it's magnetically locked to the magnets there, and it won't fall. It hovers. It hovers there of its own ability because it's a superconductor that's now been frozen. Very, very similarly to this effect. And you can place a magnet above it in any place and it'll stay there.
Yeah.
Right? Exactly the same, in the same way. So just think about it, that is on a very small scale. You make that bigger and apply some more energy, and you've got an anti-gravity device. Also, what was his name? The guy with glasses that talked about the way that they moved with the 3 gimbaled anti-gravity devices. He talked about the handprint thing with the pegs, and he worked at S4. You know the guy's name.
I do. If only I could remember it.
Yeah, well, you just keep that search going now.
Let's go.
All right. So, back to the text. In an HTSD, the tiny gravitational effect of each individual atom is multiplied by the billions of atoms in the disk. Using about 1 kilowatt of electricity, Lee says, her device could potentially produce a force field that would effectively neutralize gravity above 1 foot diameter region extending from the surface of the planet to outer space. Lee described her device as a method of generating a never before seen force field that acts on matter in a way that is similar to gravity. Since it may be either repulsive or attractive, she calls it AC gravity, Larry Smalley, the former chairman of the University of Alabama at Huntsville UAH Physics Department, says of this work, basically, you are adding a couple of vectors to zero it, that's gravity, out or enhance it. So if you've played a video game that has a gravity gun, where if you flick it one way, like a handheld drill, it goes one way, you flick it the other, it goes the other. Well, in some video games, you could fire it at something to make it just repel off into space, like it was anti-gravity, or you could increase the gravity on it by directing and firing it to make it collapse to the ground. Just imagine if that were an element of this technology. Lee describes her device as a method of generating a never-before-seen force field that acts... Oh, actually, I've read that. Interestingly, Einstein's theory of relativity predicts this effect. All objects produce a gravitomagnetic energy, the amount of force proportional to its mass and acceleration. Lee says that the main reason this energy has never been detected is that the Earth spins very slowly, and the field strength decreases rapidly as you move away from the center of the planet. Beginning with the most basic law of physics, which is force equals mass times acceleration, Lee reasoned that it would be possible to perform the same experiment here on Earth using ions locked in the aforementioned lattice structure inside a superconductor, because when an ion rotates around a magnetic field, the mass goes along for the ride. This, according to Einstein, should produce the gravitomagnetic field. Ions, unlike Earth, have a minuscule mass. But another important difference to the Earth is that they spin very quickly, rotating more than a quadrillion times a second.
That's a lot, by the way.
Yeah, it is, compared to our planet Earth's 24-hour rotation. Lee calculates this movement will compensate for the small mass of the ions. Lee explains that as the ions spin, they also create a gravitoelectric field perpendicular to the spin axis. And we all know that, I think the right-hand rule of electricity, which shows the direction and which something does because of the spin. So in nature, this field is unobserved because the ions are randomly arranged, thus causing their tiny gravitoelectric fields to cancel out one another. In a Bose-Einstein condensate, where all the ions behave as one, something very different occurs. Lee says that if the ions in an HTST are aligned by a magnetic field, the gravitoelectric fields they create should also align, build a large enough disk, and the cumulative field should be measurable. Build a larger disk, and the force field above it should be controllable, something pointable in any direction. Lee's theory has passed through the scientific quality control peer review process, and an HTST has been constructed. But important technical unknowns remain. Lee has since left UAH. She and several colleagues are striking out on their own to commercialize devices based on her theory and a proprietary HTST fabrication technique. Public money goes private again. Lee's next step is to raise the several $1 million needed to build the induction motor that individually spins the ions in the HTST. It will, quoted, "It will take at least 2 years to simulate the machine on a computer," says Smalley, who plans to join Lee as yet unnamed company after he retires from UAH, and is quoted, "We want to avoid the situation that occurred in fusion, where extremely expensive reactors were built, turned on, and didn't work as intended because of unforeseen plasma instabilities." Lee says she has turned down several offers for financial backing. It is less about the money than control. investors want control over the technology, she says. This is too important. It should belong to all American people. Well, that's the last statement that you ever hear from someone who then disappears into the military-industrial complex.
Well, that's the thing, right? So her company is actually still registered, believe it or not. But what it does, so we don't know. And clearly, it doesn't belong to all the American people. We can see that. That never happened. And look, there's another article here. It's a long article, but it's important that we go there. And I took this from. I'll tell you where I took it from. As soon as I find where I put it. Jeez, it's a long article.
It's a very long article.
Oh, my God. So we'll probably
talk about this one next week.
But nonetheless, here we go. I took it from Wired.
Good
Wired magazine.
grief, it's long.
Yeah, Wired.com, and there's a whole bunch of sources as well, additional information. But it was taken from Wired, 1998 Wired, okay? 1998.
I've got an idea. Why don't we speculate in the absence of this article for next week? Speculate now.
Okay, go on.
Oh. Well, I just, if I could say anything about this, not the article that I haven't heard yet, but in regards to how things turn out, all I've got to go by here is the fellow who invented, this is part of AI and about face recognition. So I met this guy at a trade show, 20 years ago, and he had a camera set up and it was looking down the faces of all the people in those trade show aisles. And it was choosing the best image for itself, right? And eventually he got the tech so good that when asked, how does it work? He goes, really, I don't know, because I looked at to see what it thought was a good face according to its data structure, and I couldn't work it out. I couldn't work out how it did it, because he kept improving itself by doing 5 copies, choosing the best one, letting it run, doing 5 copies, which one was the best one, and he said in the end he didn't actually understand any of it, and it was pretty good because he's still alive. And that was sold, and now militaries use it. Private industry has caught up and made their own, or hacked it, or done whatever they've done, and redeveloped it. This, though, I'm going to say, is probably the most important invention in all of humanity, is anti-gravity.
Yeah.
Everything else pales into comparison. If all you have to do is supply some power to a disc, or make it spin in order to align everything, and then subject it to cold, and now you've got like a ray gun that you can increase gravity or decrease gravity, or make a force field around your person. My goodness. That totally changes 2 things: everyday life and war. If you could hover something into place at some ridiculous speed that, like the Tic Tac, right? Hover it into place, leave something and the thing you left there exploded, or you had a device that was completely impervious to everything, that you could avoid anything that was trying to shoot it, even bullets. You could do the Neo thing, Mackie.
Yes, you could.
And just go, no. And all the bullets just stand there in the air and then fall to the ground.
That's correct.
You can't... I think it would be difficult for even the 2 of us to come up with all the ways that you could use this technology.
Okay, if you had it, you can break apart suns, stars. You can break apart planets.
Star Destroyer.
You can do whatever you want with this. This kind of this kind of power and force is. This is probably a Type 3 civilization. Sorry, Type 1, because we're starting with small. This would get us right on the way to becoming a Type 1 civilization, being able to create Dyson sphere type stuff, right? Because if you no longer have to worry about, what is the the hardest thing in space exploration today? The hardest thing.
It's carrying the amount of fuel to be able to travel to where you want to go.
Getting off the planet, actually. Getting out of the gravity well of the Earth is the hardest thing, right? Because you're right. You're carrying 3/4 of your rocket is fuel.
That's right.
So think of a really, really small living room with 4 or 5 people that sits on a massive bomb. That's what you're doing. Every time we launch a rocket, that's what we do.
Now,
we
7/8. So you talked about the amount of fuel as being 3/4. 7/8 of what remains are engines, and the 1/8 sliver. That's once again, it's the toothpick and the matzo ball, right?
But yeah, 100%.
And that's your payload.
Yes. Now, okay, so that's the hardest thing. Escaping the gravity well. It's the hardest thing. It's hard. It's really, really hard. So a lot of talk is about, let's create our spaceships in space. Yeah, of course, that makes perfect sense. We build a space platform, and all subsequent, spacecraft should be constructed in space, and then off they go. Now, but if you can negate gravity, and this is not just about negation of gravity, but manipulation of gravity.
Mm-hmm.
Think about this for just a second. Let's say you can now, you've got these disks, and there's a directional effect that you can produce if you want to, right? If you wanted to, theoretically, just bear with me here, and you can tell me I've got rocks in my head. You can create a gravitational pull so strong that it will propel your spacecraft forward at such a speed that you will get close to the speed of light.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we can't get to the speed of light or break it, it seems, or so people tell us. I don't know if it's true or not.
Probably preposterous, like that 28-mile-an-hour train.
Yeah, I know. But let's just go with what people believe today. But if you could do that, you could do so fairly cheap, because she used 1 kilowatt of electricity. 1 kilowatt of electricity for her disk. Right? Now, proportionally, if we get better with energy usage, etc., we might be even, get better results with more, exotic materials, whatever the case may be. But we probably could get better at it. And all of a sudden, you realize, oh my God, there's nothing you cannot do. And things like building the pyramids, for example, right? All of a sudden, of course we can, easy. Now, just think about that for a second. You look at Baalbek, 1,000-ton stones, 1,000 tons. Never mind the how. It's the why would you do that? And why?
Well, the why is because you can.
Because you can.
That's right.
That's right. Because you can.
I mean, we can't, but they did.
They could, because they did. They did. Because we built everybody in recorded history has built either with cement, concrete, or stones that were manageable.
Yeah.
Right? Even we today, we build mostly in steel and concrete, in prefab and bricks, and so forth. We don't engage in monolithic constructions, because why would you? Right? Why would you? It makes no sense. It's completely uneconomical. Yet they did. And the answer, as Dave has rightly said, because they could. For them, it was no thing. So if you think about it for a second, now that the technology that was described, that Dr. Ning Li, for all intents and purposes, invented, is not really all that complex, per se. I mean, it's genius, and it's great, and so forth. And clearly, it is something that the FOIA is not going to release to us for a very long time yet.
Not until after the fake alien invasion.
That's right. Are we getting a super weapon now? No, but it also makes me wonder, because of the Nazi bell and what it could do or said it could do, etc., if that was also the super weapon that Hitler was describing. Because as a weapon, this is what you could do. You got a 1 million strong army with tanks and whatever in front of you. if your device is sufficiently honed and calibrated and powerful, you can flatten that army. And I mean it literally. You can flatten that army by inducing hypergravity in the field around them.
Imagine hypergravity, Mickey.
Yeah?
That
4,
would
5,
liquefy
6.
people, yeah.
Yeah, 10 gravities. I mean, look, honestly, you only have to double gravity before warfare becomes impossible. Okay? And all of a sudden, forget force fields. Actually, if you create a gravity field around something, that's the force field. Because it'll let's say there's an ICBM flying you toward your city.
At you, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, but around your city, you have managed to create this hypergravity field.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as the missile hits it, it will crash into the ground, pulverized depending on the strength.
Yeah.
Possibly so fast that it cannot actually explode. Okay?
Yeah. Yeah, it destroys all the materials in it.
Yeah. We can knock the planet.
Do you know what? I'd like one that just turned it into so super light that it flung it out to space.
That's another thing.
Yeah.
You can things just float away. You create the opposite of like an anti-gravity field.
That's right.
Let's say.
Yeah,
but you're negating it by magnitudes. Okay.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, things just float off.
That's right.
In fact, maybe not even float, but because maybe they're repelled.
They're repelled and just flung off into space. That's right.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Flung off. Because we've seen this. In fact, all of science. In fact, we are using the slingshot effect when we launch spacecraft.
Yeah.
Oh, what is that? No, look it up. But the point is, if you can do if you had the power, the wherewithal to manipulate gravity. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about manipulating gravity, not so much maybe creating anti-gravity, but we're talking about the manipulation of gravity.
Lee says about the positive and negative of it. So the spin would change the effect.
Yes.
Totally.
Exactly. So the possibilities of these devices would be mind-blowing. And if we know anything about anything, is that miniaturization would come into play as well. So let me play you this scenario, right? 50 years ago, a 1 megabyte hard drive weighed a ton.
Yeah.
And needed a crane to be lifted into a building. And I just bought my brother I want to say a 128, 256 gig nano card, SD card. Micro, not that. Nano is
yeah, that's right.
And it's the size not even of my fingernail.
With the plastic housing, it's your little fingernail size, but the chip inside it is honestly like a grain of sugar.
Yeah. Now think about that for a second. Now,
yeah.
And this goes up by orders of 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
So a kilobyte goes to a megabyte. It's 1,000 times. A megabyte goes to a gigabyte by 1,000.
That's right.
A gigabyte goes to a terabyte by 1,000. As far as storage capacity is
concerned. And they were talking about the efficiencies of this being 6 times the magnitude.
Yeah, it's actually exactly
bigger.
Exactly. And it's about actually 1,024. But that's neither here nor there. But just think about that for a second. So you miniaturize these devices. You find more efficient power sources. Let's say, right? And battery technology is always advancing, it seems. And all of a sudden you've got a handheld house leveler or city leveler. So you've got godlike weapons. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So the HTSD, high temperature superconductor, there is now what they call a room temperature. There's been a rumor getting around that there is a room temperature superconductor now.
Yeah.
That doesn't need to be cooled.
Think about that.
That means they've just aligned everything better in their ions, right? Yeah.
It's actually. I mean, look, I'm for freedom of information. I really am, but I understand why this tech wouldn't be. It's like out there in the world. I also understand why a lot of the Tesla stuff isn't out there in the world, because the truth is this, right? Dave and I and most of the listeners here, we think of all the Star Trek-y, idealistic, wonderful things that could happen, and the way it should be done, etc., etc. And it's all wonderful, right? And we would use it to make mankind better. But there's a bucket load of people out there that don't feel like that at all. Not even close.
Yeah, not the weapons makers. Take care, everyone. This has been David Mackey's Shiny Side Out for episode 598. Catch us during the week, 7 a.m. Eastern Time, Tuesday and Thursday for Plato's Cave, and we'll see you again this time next week. Another Shiny Side Out. In the meantime, take care, and and Jer Bear's awesome show is coming up next. After hours. Tune in and chill out with the vibes.